All right. So I want to welcome everyone to the kickoff of the Summer of SABR Golden Celebration Series. I guess it would be better to say the top of the first in this case. My name is Emily Hawks, and I'm going to be your host for today's events. I do want to note there will be one scheduling change this evening. We won't be having the Future 50 survey analysis as noted in the schedule, as the presenter Marty Resnick unfortunately had a personal emergency come up. So we certainly wish him well and hope we can reschedule with him very soon. So today we'll be leading off with the Future of Women in Baseball panel, then we'll be heading straight into our baseball rules changes panel. But the fun does not stop there. We have other excellent programming planned for the rest of this weekend, and also the Mole Conference planned in late July and sessions planned for August as well. So definitely be sure to check out the full schedule of events on sabr.org to find out more info about those future sessions. And one last bit of housekeeping, as you have questions through the session, please do submit those via the Q&A function in the bottom of the window here, and we'll aim to reserve a bit of time at the end of each session for audience submitted questions. And then a reminder to attendees also that closed captioning is available by clicking the live transcript button on the bottom right of your window. So let's go ahead and jump right into it. We have a truly all-star panel of guests that I'm really excited to talk to today. So we'll go ahead and introduce them. So first I want to welcome Janet Marie Smith. Janet Marie currently serves as the Executive Vice President of Planning and Development for the Los Angeles Dodgers, where she's overseen large-scale improvement and modernization projects at Dodger Stadium. She's also very well known for her work on Oriole Park at Camden Yards, as well as work with Fenway Park in Boston and Turner Field with the Atlanta Braves. So welcome to Janet Marie.
Thank you.
Also want to welcome Katie Krall, who is a baseball operations analyst with the Cincinnati Reds. Katie is a Northwestern University alumnus and an inaugural member of Major League Baseball's Diversity Fellowship Program, which I'm excited to talk to her about. She's currently pursuing her MBA at University of Chicago's Booth School of Business, and Katie has also been published in SABR's Baseball Research Journal. So welcome to Katie.
Thanks, Emily.
And finally, I want to welcome Bianca Smith. Bianca made history this year when she was hired as a minor league coach with the Boston Red Sox organization, becoming the first Black woman ever to serve as a coach in professional baseball. While at Dartmouth, Bianca played softball, club baseball, and was on the cheer team. She got both a JD and an MBA in sports management at Case Western, and she also spent time coaching in collegiate baseball and working in baseball ops with Major League Baseball prior to being hired as a minor league coach for the Red Sox. Welcome, Bianca.
Thanks, Emily.
And Bianca, I actually want to start with you because I feel like I just read the resume of someone with like 3 decades of experience, but yeah, here you sit with probably 3 decades of career still in front of you. But I understand that actually when you first got to college, you had intentions to become a veterinarian. So had baseball been in the back of your mind as an alternate career option, or was this really only a path that materialized for you once you were already in college?
It was definitely something that happened when I was in college. I wanted to be a veterinarian for about 12 years. And I took one biology class my freshman year and went, this is not for me. I need to figure out something else. And I kind of fell into it. I actually worked for a local YMCA, just keeping score for a basketball team, and realized, wow, this is a lot of fun being around sports, and realized, people have to do this for a living. So I knew if I was going to work in sports, it was going to be baseball, though, since it's been my favorite sport since I was 3.
Oh,
awesome. So yeah, definitely fell into it.
Yeah, that's great. And Janet Marie, I understand you also didn't really start out on the sports path, and I've heard you say that working in sports wasn't really even a career goal of yours, but now you have extensive experience, not just in the sports industry, but also in the industries of architecture and urban planning. And I believe these sectors have also been seeing an increasing proportion of women working in these fields where maybe historically they had been more male dominated. So I'm curious to hear from you if there are any parallels or differences that you see between these industries and the way that gender representation has evolved.
Well, of course I do. I think women are more accepted, more expected in professions these days than they were then. But you're absolutely right. Architecture schools in particular still have a dismal record when it comes to moving women from education to the profession. Schools are 50-50, but you look at most firms, and there are very few women-owned firms and very few women principals in the larger firms. So I guess we're hoping that we may have cracked the ceiling, but there's still a lot of a lot of room to grow in that field. One of the things I've enjoyed about my career is you're right. I didn't pursue sports per se. I wrote to Larry Lucchino, then president of the Orioles, about working on what we now know as Camden Yards, because it was the first time that a Major League Baseball team had moved into an urban setting and had made a affirmative statement about wanting to be part of the city. And I was really impressed with that. That's really my first love, is cities and how you make them come alive and how you make them feel like they're a communal place. And I think that's something that urbanity and baseball really share. And I've really enjoyed bringing the two together.
That's awesome. So Katie, it sounds like you might be the one in the group who knew from pretty early on that working in baseball was the path for you from the get-go. And I understand that you told your dad when you were 10 or 11 that you were going to be the first female GM. And as it turns out, the person who barely beat you to the punch actually had a hand in your career path at Major League Baseball. So you were part of the inaugural class of the MLB Diversity Fellowship Program. And I would just love for you to tell us a bit about that program and maybe share a couple highlights of your experience that stand out in your memory.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I was so fortunate that Kim chose me. So the Diversity Fellowship was a program designed to promote women and people of color into front office executive roles someday. And so I interviewed in fall of 2017, and the first interview was with Kim. And I remember receiving the email and thinking to myself, oh my gosh, this is the Michael Jordan of female sports executives. I can't believe she's going to talk to me for a half an hour. I'm nobody. So met with Kim, met with 3 other senior vice presidents at MLB, and then got hired the day after my 21st birthday. So really an extraordinary experience. To this day, I can't believe I was chosen. Really fortunate to work at Central Baseball. I think the cool thing is you get to work on a lot of macro level projects that teams aren't considering. So like what's the quality of play, negotiating for the CBA. So all of those experiences and relationships, I think, really helped me then pivot to a team having that kind of macro level perspective.
That's great. Yeah, so going back to you, Bianca, I know you have this really impressive educational resume, starting with this degree from Dartmouth in sociology, followed by getting both a law degree and an MBA from Case Western. And then you've also done extensive research in analytics and biomechanics, and all this is on top of your on the field playing experience. So I'm interested, how has this foundation of really diverse knowledge informed the way that you approach things as a coach?
I think the biggest thing it's helped me with is just being open-minded. I mean, every player is going to be different. Every player's body is going to be different, so they're going to move differently. But also just the way that they approach playing, just the way they are as athletes, they're going to be different. I can't coach every athlete the exact same way. So it might not seem like they always relate, but I think just the idea, again, of just being open-minded, being willing to listen and take on different ideas. And especially down here, I mean, we've got a coaching staff of like 9 or 10. I mean, there's a lot of people putting in ideas, but at the same time, we mesh so well together because we have so many different perspectives. So if there's something that I might have a question about, there's always somebody else that I can go to, and vice versa. So that's been the biggest thing I think, like, my education has brought, is just being willing to listen to other ideas and kind of merging them and making them work for whichever player I'm working with.
That's great. So going back to you, Janet Marie, so, you know, when we're thinking about the topic of diversity in baseball, I think we often think about the players, the coaches, or maybe more recently, the makeup of the front office, but maybe the group that we don't hear about quite as often is the fans themselves. So I'm curious, from a planning and development perspective, how does the diversity of a fan base really inform your approach to designing ballpark experiences?
Well, I think it's kind of old news that 50% of our fans are women. That's, you know, I think that when, you know, I don't know how else to say it. That's just old news. I still look back on the early days that I was working on Camden Yards and how potty parity was such a big thing. You're like, what was that about? You know, so how we needed to put 50% of our restaurants were supposed to be women. It's like, why are we even talking about this? So happily, we're not talking about that anymore. We're past that. And I think there's been an awful lot of studies shown that really, especially when it comes to families making choices about how to spend their discretionary dollars, women being the ones who make the choice. And so I feel like you can talk about women making up a a large percentage of the fan base, women make the choice. But I got to tell you, I think men like clean restrooms and not having to stand in line just as much as women. Like, I really don't think there's a big difference in fan expectations when it comes to gender. And I think one of the things that I've always tried to work really hard on with my team on all these projects, whether it's building something new or whether it's renovating something, is just to make it really comfortable and really have the place tell a story. I think there's something just so magical about baseball parks, and the game itself lends itself to every place being different and every place having its own personality. And fans love to discover that. This is the only sport where fans like go around the country and check off boxes and count how many ballparks they've been to. Anybody who loves hockey that does that? Like, no.
That's a good point.
So I think it's incumbent upon those of us who've inherited the enviable role of being stewards of these parks to make certain that each of them retain their individuality and the things that make them special and celebrate their culture. And I think that spans across generations, it spans across gender, it spans across ethnic groups, it spans across our ability to spend money. Whether you're buying the cheapest ticket or whether you have the luxury of a premium ticket, you're there to watch baseball, you're there to take in a whole experience.
Yeah. I definitely want to highlight one of the things you said and drill a little deeper. So, when we're thinking about the fan experience, as you said, we know that women tend to make up around half of the MLB fan base, yet, at least from my perspective, sometimes baseball often doesn't act that way. I feel that sometimes certain marketing efforts that are targeted at women have felt at times maybe condescending at worst or maybe very narrow at best. I think, for example, it's great to raise awareness of breast cancer, but women are more than just breast cancer and pink ribbons. And so I think that there's, obviously a great amount of diversity among female identifying fans themselves. So I'm curious to get each of your thoughts around maybe what are some ways that baseball can expand its efforts to celebrate women without really reverting to this narrow perspective of female identity. And maybe I'll start with you, Katie.
Yeah, I think one that really stands out, Emily, is leading into that history. So I wrote a paper at Northwestern on the Cubs during the 30s, and they used to have Ladies' Day, and people couldn't believe the women who would stay out overnight and camp out at the corner of Clark and Addison to get these free tickets. Effa Manley was the trailblazer as a Negro Leagues owner, Margaret Donahue with the Cubs. So there is this really rich history and narrative of women impacting this game, and I think Major League Baseball would be really wise to showcase that and teach young girls and young boys too that there's always been a precedent of both genders impacting the sport.
Yeah, that's super interesting. How about you, Bianca? Any additional thoughts there?
Well, one that came to mind is actually something I think MLB has started to do, but I think could do better, is highlighting the women who are currently in the game. I mean, we have, Women in Baseball Day, which occasionally teams might say something, or Women in Baseball Week, and that's great. But if we highlighted more women, especially the ones that you don't see very often, the ones who are really behind the scenes, because for me, I had no idea there were so many women working in this game until I got this job. And this is the third professional team I've been with, not to mention the commissioner's office, and I still didn't know this. So just highlighting that there are so many women already who are in this game that can inspire other women to get in as well. Because if they're always thinking, oh, there's nobody else really in it, we're not going to be able to do much. We're not going to be able to change much where we are right now. So I think that'd be a great way to start too. It's just highlighting that and also getting women opinions. I don't want to harp on the apparel and stuff, but that is still an area I think MLB please stop doing the women's cut jerseys or the bedazzled. Not every woman wants a pink jersey. You want a regular jersey that just fits. So, but that's a whole nother conversation we could have.
We need the marketing person on this panel. Yeah, I agree. And Jenna Maria, would also love to get your perspective. I know I could say I was so excited the other day. I went to a Mariners game and I actually heard a female PA announcer, which I hadn't heard at that ballpark for a while. I know that, like, the Giants have had women PA announcers for years, but I was just excited about that aspect of things. So I definitely think that there's a ballpark experience component to this as well.
I don't know that I have anything to add to what Katie and Bianca said. And your comment is exactly right, too. The more women's voices we hear, I mean, literally hear, the less, the less of a thing it is. And there are more and more women who are working in baseball. And I think one of the hardest things is to stay with the sport, too. There are a lot of entry-level positions. And I think one of the toughest things is figuring out how you move up, how you get noticed, how you manage to influence executive decisions. And so I think Bianca's point about the way teams celebrate and point to women who are working in baseball and not they're not just those who are household names. There are a few, which is nice, but there's so many behind the scenes, just as there are men. There are a lot of jobs in baseball that we don't think of as being relevant. And I think that's one thing I always remember, that because I didn't come into baseball through a traditional path, I'm much more aware and respectful when people come from other industries. And I think people from other industries often bring a perspective that's helpful to the game, so that it does continue to have a broader perspective rather than narrowing or looking too much like other sports either. I think would be a sad thing.
Right. Yeah, that actually segues into a related thing that I wanted to ask about in terms of, the diverse backgrounds that can really kind of drive you towards working in baseball that you maybe wouldn't really think about. So I think that is what's cool about this panel, is you all have backgrounds in so many different disciplines, and the game has obviously evolved so much and it continues to evolve. I think especially in how it incorporates science and technology and building better teams and optimizing player performance. I think you're seeing roles and departments that you didn't see a few decades ago, with like analytics departments, nutritionists, things like that. So that really kind of opens the door for people who maybe didn't have a traditional path into working in sports in the past. So I'd love to hear from each of you to find out maybe what new roles or specialties you think are going to maybe emerge in the next several years that could provide different types of career paths for people who are interested in working in the game. So maybe let's start with you, Bianca.
I'm not sure. I mean, they're not really like new roles, but I think as they become more prevalent, definitely, I mean, you've already mentioned it, nutrition. We actually have a female nutritionist for the minor leagues with the Red Sox, which has been really cool. I mean, she travels to all the teams, so they get to see her as well. Athletic training, I know, has been another one. And then, I mean, mental skills, I know, has been a big one too, that it's not quite new, but I think it's becoming more accepted. And I think that's definitely an area that, I mean, women could definitely get into that area pretty easily. We just need to get them that exposure.
Right.
So like I said, I don't think they're not really like new positions. I think they're just becoming a little bit more, or I guess visual would be the right word.
Yeah.
But those are the biggest ones that I think of. And that's more just from like even just my experience down here, just seeing the positions that we have and seeing the different roles that people make up.
Yeah. Janet Marie, anything to add?
Well, I was going to say there are a lot of traditional roles in baseball that I don't know why women aren't pursuing, because just as there are an awful lot of women coming out of finance, coming out of legal fields, marketing, analytics. There's just a whole pyramid of skills that it takes to run a baseball team, the front office as well as the team itself. And there's nothing at all that's gender specific about any of those things. So that is maybe true across a lot of different industries, but I think it's worth mentioning that it's not just new roles we need to look at, but some of the old ones too.
That's a great point. Yeah. Anything you wanted to add, Katie?
Yeah, I think Janet Marie's point was really eloquent and well taken, and I agree with Bianca too about like a greater concentration of resources at the minor league level. I think something that we've talked about at the Reds is like a director of strategic initiatives or someone who's like specifically charged with like optimizing personnel deployment, whether that be scouts, whether that be analysts. And I was actually talking to Thad Levine, the Twins GM, in Minnesota when we were there this previous week, and he was saying I think we're on a renaissance in baseball in terms of people with MBAs, people with more business backgrounds who are looking at front offices more so as companies rather than just small startups. And I think that startup mentality of all hands on deck, everyone does everything, has kind of given way now to a more formal, elaborate sculpture where you have really qualified people who are like very specialized in their backgrounds.
Yeah, and I'd love to hear a little bit more about your journey, Katie, because I know that you, from a very early age, you had this goal of leading a baseball front office, and along the way, you were really making career choices that kind of set you up to succeed on this path. And then I understand when you're considering grad school, you did kind of find yourself at this crossroads in terms of, do I go to law school? Do I go to business school? So can you talk about maybe some of the factors that were coming into play when you were making that decision?
Yeah, definitely, Emily. I mean, ever since I was little, everyone told me you're going to go to law school. You like to read and write. My mom still calls me with like legal questions as if I have any insights whatsoever to provide. But so as a result, I went to MLB and I would write, a series of memos for people like Dan Halem or Paul Mifsud. And I really enjoyed that process. But I think, again, considering where front offices are going, I really wanted to learn how to lead and how to lead strategically. And what appealed to me about Booth was the quantitative perspective that they take on everything. So you'll be in classes on project management and suddenly graphs will appear about like game theory and things that you would maybe traditionally classify as softer skills, but that the University of Chicago has taken a really data-driven approach to. So I think that's been phenomenal. And even though it's been a lot to balance working full time with classes on the weekends, I like that I'm able to take what's happening in the classroom and then bring it immediately to the Reds come Monday morning.
That's awesome. So maybe switching gears a little bit to think about maybe a little bit more the playing side of the game. So Bianca, while you were at Dartmouth, I know you played on both the softball and the club baseball team, as well as the cheer team. I don't know how you ever slept or found time to do anything.
Sleep.
But I know oftentimes, as girls get older, they usually get funneled towards softball rather than baseball for various reasons, including scholarship opportunities. And, while that might be the right path for many girls, I think for others, it might be disappointing not to be able to further pursue their baseball playing careers. So I'm curious for you, as somebody who has experience in both sports, do you see an expanding path for women's baseball, especially at the high school and collegiate levels?
Definitely. Honestly, it's amazing, and it's really encouraging to see how many girls are playing high school baseball. I'll give a shout out to Baseball for All because they've been doing great work helping girls who want to play high school baseball and have been rejected or try to push to softball. And now those girls are going off to college and playing college baseball. And Sports Illustrated just came out with an article about the number of women who are currently playing college baseball or who plan on playing college baseball in the next year or two. So seeing that, I think that's where it comes with the whole see it and you can do it. So now that more girls are seeing that, they're realizing, hey, I can play baseball. I don't have to play softball if I don't want to. There's nothing wrong with either sport, but as any softball or baseball player knows, they're two different sports. Mm-hmm. So having that option, I mean, I definitely see it becoming more of an option. And I know Baseball for All is also working on trying to create women's college teams, trying to get more schools who are interested, even if it's starting at the club level. So this is definitely a movement that's happening really quickly. I'm excited to see how far it goes, and I can see it going really far and just getting more women in baseball. Pretty excited. I think it's going to happen like really quickly.
Yeah. Well, I'm excited to hear you say that. It makes me feel more optimistic. So Katie, going back to your time at Northwestern, I know you created the first baseball student promotions coordinator position that was really designed to engage more students in collegiate baseball And, I think we hear a lot about baseball losing its popularity with younger people in general, even though not all the data really supports that. But I'm curious, what was your experience like in really getting more young people engaged with baseball? And did it seem to be resonating with them the same way that it has with you?
Definitely. So I think the wonderful thing about Northwestern is we can be a little apathetic when it comes to our sports teams occasionally. So
Uh-huh.
creating a culture around the baseball team, we ended up having a good season and advancing pretty far. But I think to me, it became less a question of, do they know who Jack Dunn is? Do they have familiarity with the players? And more so, like, could we make this a social and an experience? And I think Janet Marie probably knows this better than anyone. But when you're coming to a baseball game, a great deal of people are not there because they want to keep score and sit in their seat the whole time. Like, they really want to have a camaraderie and a sense of community. So for me, it was, working with our coach, Spencer Allen. It was his first season there, and figuring out ways that we could draw people to the ballpark and really, have them fall in love with the game first, and then get familiar with the players and who was going to be drafted, and the nitty gritty that, Bianca and I live for, but
Right.
maybe the casual Northwestern student isn't as fixated on.
Right. Yeah, I think that, to Janet Marie's earlier point, a lot of falling in love with the game is like being at the ballpark and kind of absorbing that atmosphere. And Janet Marie, I know that you've overseen the design or redesign and construction of some of the most iconic places in baseball for some of the most iconic franchises in baseball. And we would otherwise have been in Baltimore seeing some of the fruits of your labors there. So
Oh, exactly. Yeah.
yeah, hopefully very soon. But yeah, you work with, at Oriole Park at Camden Yards, improvements to Fenway Park, converting the 1996 Atlanta Olympic Stadium to Turner Field, and then now, renovations at Dodger Stadium. So I know you kind of alluded to this earlier, and I would love to maybe get a little bit more details of your experiences in terms of how the culture of each of those teams and each city has really informed your approach to each of these projects, and also maybe just how your approach might have evolved over the years as well.
Well, I think especially with a renovation, the first thing to know is you are not the expert. You simply are not going to walk into Fenway Park and tell a generation of fans what they need to know about what makes it better. So you need to listen. I don't know how else to say it. I think you just need to listen. You need to listen to fans. You need to listen to the people who work there: ushers, concessionaires, groundskeepers, police, in-house security. There's just dozens and dozens of different corners of our that make the place run. And then you need to listen to the building too. I really think if you look at a place, it will tell you what to do. And I think that's one reason I've enjoyed renovations so much. And even Camden Yards, while it was I worked on it from the ground up, we had saved the historic B&O warehouse, and that decision informed everything. That decision is what led to Utah Street, probably arguably the first quote outfield experience in baseball, which I still think is sort of a funny term, but we can talk about that in another forum. It led to the choice of materials. It led to the configuration of both the playing field and the seating bowl. And so not dissimilar to working on the renovation of either Fenway Park or Dodger Stadium. You look at, why is that building still there? Why was Fenway Park, still there 90 plus years? And in spite of the team's many pursuits to build a new building, and what was it about Dodger Stadium that allowed it to become the third oldest park in the major leagues, even though if you roll back the clock 20 years, there probably were a dozen that were older but had been torn down. So why did that one survive? And I think that's what makes these buildings special, is that there is something about the ones that we have, and they're so different architecturally, but they're also different just culturally, and the different cross section of fans from city to city, the traditions of the seventh inning stretch, and the foods that you eat, and the apparel that you wear. And I think that there's just something about listening, I guess, that I think is really important to knowing how to approach a project. So I hope I never stop doing that. I do think there's a tendency sometimes when you've been at something for a while and your confidence is higher than it was in your youth, to assume that maybe you do know more than the next person, but you don't. That's what I've learned. You don't. And especially when you're providing a place for people to make a choice to spend their time, you really want to listen to what they want. So.
Yeah. Yeah. I would love to highlight a particular project of yours with your current team that I think gets to your earlier point about how much, certain players even matter so much to an organization or really to baseball as a whole, and talk a little bit about the design and installation of the Jackie Robinson statue at Dodger Stadium, and you oversaw the design and installation of that in 2017, I believe. So just given the magnitude, just not only of what he means to the Dodgers organization, but really just to baseball and really the world as a whole, I imagine this was a daunting task to take on. So how did you approach it?
And I still sort of get chills just thinking about it. I think those of us who work for the Dodgers feel that the Dodgers' historical ventures into diversity have really set a tone that I hope we take as seriously as I feel like we do. It's Jackie Robinson is certainly the most important, but Fernando Valenzuela as a player, Sandy Koufax as a player, just there's a Jaime Jarrín as an announcer for 60 years. Who would have thought about putting a Spanish announcer 60 years ago in most broadcast booths? So to your question though about the Jackie Robinson sculpture, this was kind of an amazing thing. While there's sculptures all over America and many at baseball parks to celebrate baseball figures, but Dodger Stadium did not have any. And our chairman Mark Walters and President Stan Kasten decided that was just something missing without having Jackie portrayed in bronze at Dodger Stadium. So as soon as we announced that we wanted to do that for the 70th anniversary of his breaking into the major leagues, as you might imagine, there were all kinds of artists that, raised their hands and wanted to be considered. And I had worked with some really excellent artists, both at Fenway Park and at Camden Yards. So I had my own prior experiences too. But we ended up choosing an artist by the name of Brantley Cadet, whose credentials came to us from him. He wrote to the fan services tab on our website. He read in the paper, sort of an old school way of approaching a baseball team. He didn't try to find somebody in the front office. He went to the fans comment section and sent in a note and said, "I'd like to be considered. Is there a place where I can mail my credentials?" And they always make sure that those kinds of cold inquiries, whether it's about a complaint about lines at the water fountain or whether it's about a sculpture, get to the right place. And I thought his work was just fantastic. He'd done a lot of public figures, most recently the Adam Clayton Powell figure in New York, and was just really powerful public works. He's Haitian American, and that seemed to be right and appropriate for someone's choice to express Jackie. And so that was one notable decision, and I am grateful that Stan trusted me enough, having vetted all those many resumes from people who'd already done life-size sports figures, to realize that we didn't need to stay on the proven path, that there was worth taking a chance, just as Jackie had taken a chance. But it didn't stop there. We, you typically put a sculpture on a base, and so when we came time to work on the base, one of the things that struck me in doing research about Jackie Robinson was that his words were just so powerful. And if you kind of think back to where our country was in 2017, which wasn't we were working on this in 2015. If you think about sort of the political turmoil and the smoke in the air, his words just really resonated, and almost sadly that they were as powerful and meaningful today, that they hadn't aged. But we researched that and worked with his family to choose quotes to put on the base of that sculpture. So I don't see it, that I don't feel like I need to walk around and read all three of the very powerful messages in his words that he left with us on that sculpture, which is now on display at the new front door at Dodger Stadium. So now that COVID's receding and we can have fans back at full capacity, I hope we can invite all of you on this virtual conference to get up and pack your bags and come and have a chance to see that beautiful sculpture, which is at our new front door.
Well, I'm excited to see it. I'm very much looking forward to getting back there, and Dodger Stadium in general. I think it's just one of my favorite places to visit anyway. So I'm super excited to see that in person. That's great. And I think that, that also highlights what a lot of us at SABR are very interested in, not just the history of the game, but why it matters. And I think that's the perfect example of that. And
well, I've learned so much from the SABR conferences myself. I always thought of it as as a corner where statistics ruled, and if you couldn't get your head around all of that, there wasn't a place for you. And I have just had such a reset button myself with so many of the papers that have been delivered and so much of the commentary about the role of baseball in our culture, and how sophisticated that research is. And so I really value the chance to be a part of these forums so that I can continue to learn more too.
Yeah, no, same with me. And that's kind of what brought me to SABR to begin with, because I think just like you, I kind of associated it more initially with the analytics side. And that's kind of my day job is in analytics. So that's what I was kind of initially interested in. But after joining SABR, really just became so much more interested in the history, and that kind of became probably my favorite aspect of attending a lot of these conferences and things like that. So so actually that's a question that I wanted to ask Katie. So I think oftentimes I do get asked, especially in SABR circles, like, do you like the history of the game or do you like the analytics? And I think, like me, I can safely say you like both. And I know you were a history major at Northwestern, but also very much a student of the game in the Moneyball area. And obviously you work in in an analysis role now. So how would you say those two sides really inform your perspective as a baseball analyst today?
That's a really good question, Emily. And I have people say to me all the time, you are a history major. How do you have a job at all, let alone a job in baseball? Didn't you just study the fall of the Roman Empire?
Right.
Which is true. But I would say, honestly, being able to synthesize and aggregate information, that historical perspective has been so crucial to me, as we're at a point in baseball where it's not a quantity of data that we're missing, it's how do we parse through and figure out what variables are important. And I think the same process of if I'm evaluating a player and looking at certain metrics, it's almost as if I'm putting together a thesis, right? I'm drawing from certain sources, I'm pulling different strings. And so I think that background that I have in the humanities and social sciences, I think is really transferable and actually makes me a stronger analyst. So I'm definitely glad that I did study all of the emperors of Rome in my time at Northwestern.
That's good. Probably a lot of history professors on this call that are very happy to hear you say that. So switching gears a little bit, actually, there's a question that came through the Q&A pod that I just wanted to expand on a little bit. So the question was around mentors in baseball and wisdom that they've shared with you along the way. But I want to expand on that a little bit. And I think that mentorship is a huge part of, if you're lucky, you have good mentors in your career. But I think a role that's equally, if not more important, especially for people who are underrepresented in a given industry, is that of a champion. So a mentor is someone who you can really approach for advice and use as a sounding board to work things out. And a champion is really someone who's advocating for you both from the front row and behind the scenes, and keeping an eye out for opportunities for you, bringing up your name when you aren't in the room. So I'd love to hear from each of you about maybe either one, who've been the mentors and the champions in your careers, and is this a role that you try to play for others as well? So let's start with you, Janet Marie.
Well, I think, these, you're so right. These terms get all conflated, a role model, a mentor, a champion. And I was really lucky early in my career that I had my first two real jobs after school in architecture. I had a woman as a boss. And that was not only rare, but wow, what a difference it made. And I would just forever value the summer that I worked for Katie Carton and the years that I worked for Amanda Burden at Battery Park City, because it was a chance to see a woman, really, really confident in her place in the professional world, and it just forever set a tone for me to not be afraid to speak out. And I don't know what else to say. I'm super lucky about that. I don't think I ever would have. I don't think I ever would have been successful in getting the job with the Orioles in the first place if I had been timid about either approaching them or about introducing what I could do. And so when once I got into baseball, it wasn't like then I had any role models at that time. So yeah, it matters. I don't know what else to say. Yeah, it matters. And I guess we've got, I've got as many men who are mentors as I do women, but the women role models really matter the most. And I like to think that we can all be good champions of each other. I've just loved watching Billie Jean King at Dodger Stadium in the few years since she's become an investor in the Dodgers, and just how seriously she takes the opportunity to ask always women, what's your job? What are you doing? How did you get here? How do you see your future? She's such a good listener. And it's really amazing because she's Billie Jean King, like people would be just as happy to take a selfie and move on, but she always asks. And I think there's a lot to learn from watching women like that who understand their place and how important they are to other women and use that to give that back.
That's great. Bianca, how about you?
Wow, I don't know how to follow that. I mean, I found it's as I was thinking about your question, I found it's interesting that I feel like with mentors, we know we have them because they're the ones that we go to. But I feel like there's so many times we don't realize we have champions. Because I mean, I've discovered even through this job process, getting this job that and applying to other jobs, I found that I actually had people speak on my behalf, and I had no idea. So I actually think I wish this was actually something that came up more often, because yeah, we always speak about mentors and the people who give us advice, but I wish champions would actually come up and say, like, even if you don't get a job or you don't get that opportunity, say, hey, I had your back. Because even just hearing that makes such a difference. You just get that confidence, and you're like, okay,
Right.
somebody thinks that I can do this. And sometimes that's really that push that you need. I don't think this actually answers your question, but that was kind of like resonating with me because I have had mentors. I can name off several. I mean, one I feel like I name every single time I have this question is Tyrone Brooks, and everybody in baseball knows who he is because he helps everybody out and he's amazing. But I've also discovered like I have mentors and coaches who I've worked with, whether it's at the college level or the professional level. And I also have champions with the coaches that I work with. And I had no idea until like a couple of months ago. And I was like, well, I had no idea that you were actually putting my name out there. And like, that makes that difference. So again, I don't think I answered your question at all.
No, I think you did. Yeah, no, I think you did. Yeah.
But no, I found that it's been very important. And I know like I would not be where I am today without my mentors, without my champions, the ones who had my back even when I didn't realize it.
Yeah. How about you, Katie?
I completely agree with Janet, Marie, and Bianca. I think you'll find like threads of gratitude throughout our stories, because like we do owe a great deal to lots of women and men. The only thing that I'll add, I think having peers that really speak on your behalf or really vindicate you, that to me has been a huge difference maker. I think coming into MLB as the diversity fellow, it could have been really easy for my male colleagues to be like, oh, this is the token girl, or she's here as part of the press release. And for them, you know, not only to include me in projects, but to say, hey, Katie, we're going to Foley's for a happy hour after work. Right. And it
Miss
seems like,
Foley's.
yeah, right. Rest in peace.
Yes.
It could be so nominal, but, you know, to be included and brought into the fold, like, it's wonderful if Dan Halen thinks you're smart, but if your peers, the guys who sit next to you every day, like want to have lunch with you and want to talk baseball with you, that can make all the difference in the world. So I've been very appreciative that, you know, people my age have recognized my abilities and have been willing and able to engage with me, and I've learned so much from them.
Oh, that's great. So we have a couple of questions coming in here. So we have one for Janet Marie. If you could go back in time and renovate any historic ballpark that's no longer standing, which one would you choose?
Oh, wow, that's too hard. Well, I think everyone would expect Ebbets because it's such a classic, and so that's tempting.
Mhm.
But Shibe sure does look like a delicious challenge. But I keep waiting for Birmingham to call me about that crazy little park they've got there, and how much fun it would be to work on some of those, the few Negro League parks that are left standing. You know, I'm really enamored with the ones that we still have, trying to figure out how we can save places like Rickwood and give them life. And you have to give them life. You can't just preserve a building because you are nostalgic about it. So hopefully, as we look at growing baseball and youth baseball and having people enjoy it at all levels, maybe there'll be a reason to make those fields green again, which would then give me an excuse to work on the architecture around it.
There you go. There you go. All right, we have a couple of questions kind of getting at the same thing. So first, this is coming from Josh, who also is a fellow history major, so he appreciated that about you, Katie, and a now former lawyer. But his question was, if historians in the future look back at the year that the first woman played on a Major League Baseball team, what year would they say?
That's an interesting question. And I also saw someone else put in the chat the idea that like the first female professional major league player is in the Dominican right now, and she's this 15-year-old teenager. And I think that's an interesting concept. So maybe I'll tell some of the scouts to start looking for both female and males players to sign. I think what I hope will happen is that it's not simply like a marketing ploy. You know, like a woman doesn't sign like a one-day contract because, you know, they want to invite a bunch of Girl Scout troops and they want to sell more tickets. Like I really hope if and when a woman reaches the major leagues, it's because, you know, she played baseball at Clemson, or she's got this great pedigree, and like she truly is seen as a major league contributor and not just a sideshow. Because I think that can be a tricky line to walk as more companies and people recognize, you know, the value of preaching feminism and being inclusive, and it still has to be authentic for fans to really resonate with it.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. All right, one for Janet Marie. Is the increasing cost of the fan experience in ballparks having an impact on the demographics? Is it having an effect on families attending? There seems to be a stronger focus on luxury amenities these days.
Well, since I want to say no, I'll give you both sides. Of course, there's no denying that the sport and everything about it has just soared in ways that were unimaginable maybe two generations ago. But I do really value places like Dodger Stadium, where not only are there cheap seats, but better yet, they're full. And I think that is part of the conundrum. As baseball parks have gotten smaller and smaller, there's one school of thought that says, well, it's a more intimate experience. It's Baseball was meant to be intimate. It's more fun to be in a packed house of 30,000 than a half-empty house of 60. And I believe all of that. And I can do all of that. But I also think that baseball has tried really hard to keep a spectrum of affordable tickets and to always, you go from city to city. There's a family pack, there's a value pack. There are lots of different ways of putting it. I think the challenge is to make sure fans are using those. That's that to me, it's always just so depressing when you see that there's a $10 ticket that's available and they're in fantastic locations and those seats aren't full. Then you wonder what are we doing wrong?
Right. So there was a question around how do we make the game on the field more appealing to women? I know I'm not a panelist, but I am just a fan, and I would say I don't think we have to do anything. I think we're already here. I think to your earlier point, Bianca, I think, not treating women as though they need to experience the game in a different way would go a long way. But again, I'm just the moderator. So if you guys have things to add, feel free.
Actually, I would add to that. I think acceptance is another. It's hard to really enjoy a game when you feel like so many people don't think it's made for you. It's hard to enjoy a game when people assume that you're there to just look at the players or that you have no idea what's going on the field. And you have to sitting in the, so yeah, I mean, it's not fun when you tell somebody that, hey, I love baseball, and their first question is, oh, well, can you name so-and-so roster from this year?
Yeah.
Would you ask a guy that? Like, that's just not a thing. So that it makes it harder to really love the game when you're always being questioned about why you love the game.
Yes.
So I think that's, like you said, there's really not much you have to do on the field. I mean, we're here. We love the game because of the game. But again, more women are going to be more willing to actually talk about it if we're not always questioned about our knowledge or questioned about why we're there.
Right.
Like, we're there because just like you are, or just like men are, because we love the game.
Agreed. All right, I want to ask this one from Ivy Crawford. She's a Master in Economics and Politics student with an emphasis on Central and East European studies. She says, I really appreciate the diversity of backgrounds from all of you. I'm curious, since I'm a female looking to work in the sport, have you noticed, and if so, how have you overcome the idea that women who have not necessarily played the game can still know the game?
Yeah, thanks, Ivy. From my perspective, and I think this is top of mind because I just redid all of our hiring processes and created like a more quantitative formal evaluation method. For us, it's more so like, how do you holistically evaluate players and how do you add value to the front office? So like, there are lots of different ways that you can demonstrate that you know baseball. So whether that's having, technical skills and maybe writing our code and having it up in GitHub, or publishing a research paper on SABR. I think there are lots of different ways that you can demonstrate your background. So it's less so a question of, did you play D1 somewhere? Like, we even have interviewed individuals who didn't maybe play baseball, but maybe they were on the dive team. And we're more so looking for skills of teamwork and leadership that athletics brings out than, if you were, Pac-12 when you were.
Yeah.
There are some things that are really slow coming. And one disappointment for me is that about 20 years ago, Major League Baseball started asking clubs to include the provisions for women umpires in the design of their new facilities. And so Major League Baseball is littered with buildings that were born in the late 1990s and early 2000s that were designed to have 2 clubhouses for umpires. And here we are 20 years later, and every one of those, it's been turned over to the mascot. It's been turned over for the grounds crew to append to their space, whatever it is. And so there's some things that still baffle me about why we haven't seen women in certain aspects of our profession that have nothing to do with the very point you're making about having played.
So I know that we're almost at time here, and I just want to wrap up with, I guess, kind of a bigger picture question for each of you. So looking forward 5 to 10 years, what do you hope will look different in Major League Baseball? And then maybe also, what do you hope stays the same? So I want to start with you, Janet Marie.
Wow, that's a tough one. Well, I hope what stays the same, because this will reflect my biases in my work, but I hope we continue to celebrate the ballpark itself and how different they are. And I do worry, you know, as travel has become more ubiquitous and as we've gotten used to our grocery stores and our coffees and our retail apparel becoming familiar no matter what coast we're on, I worry that our architecture is starting to look the same too. And I hope we can continue to celebrate the thing that makes baseball and America so interesting, and that is the things that make us different. So like, was that my different or the same? I'm not even sure.
Could be both. Hey.
I'll just let it stand though.
Fair enough. Fair enough. How about you, Bianca?
What I hope stays the same are the fans and just how much they love the game. And this is coming from a coach who we have not had fans yet. At least with the rookie season starting up on Monday, I think we'll be allowed to have fans, but it makes a difference. It really makes a difference having fans at the games, just bringing that atmosphere. A lot of the energy that comes to games are from fans. But something I'd like to see different is not only an increase in women at non-traditionally female roles, but not making such a big deal out of it. Like to the point where it's so normal that it's not going to be this huge publicity piece of, oh, this woman finally got hired for this job.
Right.
And nobody questioning it either. Not asking, oh, did they do it because of the PR? No, she got the job because she was actually the best person for it, and nobody blinks an eye. That's what I hope is going to be different in 5 to 10 years. It might be asking a lot, but it'd be nice to see.
Yeah, here's hoping.
I don't have anything else to add. Janet Marie and Bianca are both way too eloquent. The only thing that I'll say is like these two women are truly trailblazers in such different arenas, but they are both so inspiring. So like I've jotted down notes. I always love hearing Janet Marie and Bianca speak. But again, thank you both for being here. Thank you for everything that you do for baseball.
And I would echo that back in your direction too, Katie. Exactly. Definitely. Yeah.
And you, Emily, you are so fantastic at what you do too. So
thank you. Well, thank you all so much for the really insightful and candid discussion today. I think that, we're all really grateful that you took the time to share your perspectives today. And I think we're all really excited to see what each of you accomplishes next as well. So I'll be, your fan on the sidelines cheering you on. So thank you again. And we'll hope to hear from you soon again. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Emily.
Emily.
All right. So switching gears, we're now going to head into our baseball rules changes panel. And I'm going to go ahead and introduce our panelists. So first up, we have Cecilia Tan, who is SABR's publications editor and a freelance writer and editor living in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Cecilia has been active in the Boston chapter of SABR since 2001. She's the author of both fiction and nonfiction baseball books and writes about baseball online at the web magazine Why I Like Baseball. So welcome to Cecilia. JJ Cooper is the executive editor at Baseball America, where he has been since 2002. He's covered baseball at every level since then, including college, international baseball, minor league baseball, and indie ball. So welcome to JJ.
Hello, everybody.
And then also want to welcome Rick White, who is president of the Atlantic League, where he oversees day-to-day operations of the 8-team professional partner league of Major League Baseball. Prior to joining the Atlantic League, Rick spent 15 years as a top exec with MLB, overseeing trademark licensing, corporate marketing, publishing, international, and special events. So welcome, Rick. All right.
Thank you very much, Emily. Nice to be here.
Yeah, thanks. So this is a very topical discussion. I think there's a lot to cover here. So I just want to start by posing a question to each of you around the imbalance between pitching and hitting, which has been a huge focus as of late. We're seeing far fewer hits than strikeouts than we did even 10 years ago. I think we're seeing 0.87 hits per strikeout now, where 10 years ago it was 1.23 hits per strikeout, which is a pretty drastic drop in a short amount of time. So if Major League Baseball decides to address this through rules changes, what do you think would be the most effective solution? And let's start with you, JJ.
I do think that what they're doing right now, and again, I think there's a little bit of security theater going on with the checking for foreign substances, but I do think that there is something legitimate there that would actually make a significant impact. There are much more radical ideas, I guess I have, but they're a lot more difficult to do. I've always said that I think that the ballparks that we play in should be bigger. The reality is we're playing in ballparks that in some cases are smaller. The outfields are smaller than they were in the 19 teens and 20s. And that doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. Players are obviously much bigger, stronger, faster than they were back then. And so we've kind of compressed the field in some ways. But I also am a realist and know that that's a lot more difficult than saying we're going to cut down on how much pelican grip or gorilla snot or spider tack you put on your fingers.
Right. How about you, Rick? Any thoughts on this?
Well, excuse me, I'm wiping my fingers off as we talk right now. Good to be with you all. And, you know, in our conversations with Major League Baseball, they have switched their alignment from solely dealing with things like pace of play and time of game to now something where it's really a sea change in disposition, which is we're not going to trial anything unless we think it has a chance to get to the big leagues. And the bias there is putting balls in play. We talk a lot about absolute outcomes in our conversations, but I think anything that we see tested and ultimately implemented is going to be done with an eye toward, is this going to restore some of those play values that draw us to the game in the first place? Hitting, running, great plays, spectacular athleticism. It doesn't mean that a great pitcher or a great hitter who do something offensively or defensively in their respective fields aren't tremendous and great to watch. It's just that isn't necessarily the only thing that drew all of us to the game in the first place.
Yeah. Cecilia, any thoughts?
This is the big question, I think, that's really going on right now, is that we're sort of fighting for the heart and soul of baseball in some ways. That and I'm a proponent of the DH. I like the DH, and yet I've come to this sort of existential place where I realize that for me, the game is centered on the batter versus the pitcher. You know, like that to me is the central conflict that draws me to things. So the 3 true outcomes to me are fine. But at the same time, that leaves a lot of dead space in between every strikeout, walk, or home run, and and looking at it from a more aesthetic point of view, I've come to think that, well, it's called baseball because the men are supposed to move from base to base, like it was literally in the olden days, the pitcher wasn't the opponent of the batter so much as, the job was to serve the ball into play so that it could be hit into play. And that's sort of what's missing now, and it's like, I don't think that this yin and yang are ever going to meet necessarily. And that maybe the interplay between the two of them really is what defines the eras of baseball. But it is clear that things have gone too far in one direction and really need to go in the other direction. And it's not just we're teaching hitters to hit differently now, or things like that. I mean, some of it is really just that, yeah, pitchers got better faster than hitters got better, and we need to figure out how to give the hitters back that advantage in some way. Or I mean, I'm really interested to see the experiments that are going to happen, I guess, Rick, in the Atlantic League, where the mound is going to be moved back by that extra foot. And is that extra foot going to be exactly what we need to, get that formula right? Because that's, one fraction of a second more, maybe for a major league hitter, that's the difference. So yeah, I'm really excited to see what's going to happen.
Yeah. Yeah, I want to talk about maybe one of those specific experiments in the Atlantic League and ask you, Rick, about the use of the automatic ball strike technology, aka robo umps. So can you talk a little bit about how this has gone and maybe what you think would be some of the ramifications of using this technology at the big league level?
Well, first off, props to my colleague on the panel, Mr. Cooper, the person who coined the term robo-umps, and it certainly has become part of the popular baseball vernacular. Automated balls and strikes is something people really don't comprehend as well as they think they might. And evidence A for me is our managers and our coaches and our players. A week ago, we were in one of our ballparks with the experts on automated balls and strikes from Major League Baseball. And we had representatives from two teams, including players, coaches, and managers, going through how the system works. Now, here's the good news. The system as it's designed operates beautifully. It's accurate, it's consistent, it's standardized, and from location to location, it works as well as anything I've ever seen. So a ballpark in York is going to be the equivalent of a ballpark in Long Island, and it's not going to be affected by weather, by other circumstances. It's going to work just fine. What is interesting, though, is the practical application of this. And Major League Baseball deserves a great deal of credit for maintaining the integrity and the control of the game with Major League Baseball, or with umpires generally, and with their ability to communicate where the strike zone is and how it works. All of that is terrific. Where things begin to break down are the unanticipated consequences of effectively a machine that is digitally accurate, moment by moment, day by day, inning by inning, despite everything else going on around it. So the first thing we had to do with our umpires was to teach them that they had override capability for those unforeseen circumstances that inevitably happen in any ball game. A foul tip, for example, a check swing, a balk. Often on some of those opportunities, now I'm talking specifically here about a catcher's balk, the ABS system is going to call the pitch as it sees it, but it is not set up to have the sensitivity to catcher's interference or a hit by pitch or something like that. If the ball enters the frame that is measured by the automated balls and strike system, it's going to be declared a strike. If it doesn't, it's going to be declared a ball. And it's fascinating to go to one of our games, see where a pitch is thrown, hear the communication to the umpire, and watch what's going on with the ball at the same time. I've seen a lot of pitches declared a ball that are going out of the ballpark. So it's just really interesting to see all of that. But it's the unanticipated consequences that we and Major League Baseball are learning about every day.
Yeah. Yeah, that actually kind of dovetails into my next question for you, JJ. So, when we're thinking about some of these proposed rules changes, I think a lot of what we're focused on are more of the near-term impacts of making these changes to really kind of shift the pitching hitting power balance or speed up the game. But thinking beyond these really immediate impacts, do you foresee any larger scale consequences of the rules changes? For example, how they might impact high school or collegiate baseball or player development, things like that?
I think they will. And I think one of the things we're seeing is it's funny. I think that baseball is a game that percolates up and filters down. You see some innovation that happens in high school, especially in colleges. I think colleges can innovate a little quicker because if there's a pitching coach who has a really good idea in college, all he has to convince is pretty much a head coach and they can do it. Whereas if the same pitching coach has an idea on a professional team, probably has to get sign off from health and the health and the trainers, got to get sign off from the front office. There's a lot more people to kind of approve it. So we see things filter up, but we also see things filter down. Colleges, we talked about the balls, the changing, the shifting number of balls in play, strikeout rates up, home runs up, batting averages down. That's happening in college baseball. It happened a few years later than it happened in pro baseball, but it's happening in college baseball now. But to give an example of to kind of your question, Emily, let's say that they figure out a way to make more action, more emphasize the speed of the game more so than we've seen in recent years, less of a home run, walks, and strikeouts game. Well, at some point you're going to see, and it's kind of a lagging indicator, we're going to see an indication of that partly from who are the players who are drafted. Now, again, there are the elite players, the 80 runner who's an excellent center field, Enrique, Bradfield right now, Billy Hamilton a few years ago. There are players like that still get drafted, but there are a lot fewer of those players who are getting drafted now, especially high, than there were 30 years ago. Because 30, 40 years ago, if you were a shortstop 40 years ago on an AstroTurf field in the 80s, you better have a range that you don't have to have now, because it's a different field, it's a different environment. If those things start to become emphasized again, more so at the major league level, you're going to see the college game almost by extension change as well, the high school game even, because as players are selected for that at the pinnacle of baseball, it filters down, I think, at the same time.
So I guess continuing along this kind of expanding perspective of some of these changes. So Cecilia, for baseball historians, I think there are always caveats that really kind of make it challenging to compare the game and the players of one era with another. So if you think towards the future in a world where some of these changes have been adopted, how do you think that historians will really reflect on the types of changes being proposed today, and how much of a sea change do you really think they really represent in the context of the game's history?
I think we're always going to see some changes, and we always are going to have to account for them, basically. And the thing that's been great about the recent twists and turns in the sabermetric revolution is that now we've actually got some of those, God stats like WAR, which allow us to compare players without having to, because people are being compared within their own season pool, then they can be compared sort of across seasons without us being like, well, we can't compare hitters from the dead ball era to now because of the conditions being different. It's like, well, you can, it's a different way of looking at it. And it's funny, the number of people that I talked to who are like, oh yeah, we lowered the mound in 1968, but they've forgotten that they also changed the strike zone. It's like, or they just never knew, because and the thing that's funny is the mound being lowered and the strike zone being different are something that to the average fan in the stands didn't make the game look different. It's like it didn't change sort of the aesthetic view of the game, but things like, I don't know if you were gonna things like, we've already got the experiment now with the tiebreaker rules in the major leagues with the runner on second, and you've got fans literally chanting "play real baseball" every time they do it, because they feel affronted that this is a gimmick of some kind, and I'm like, when is something a gimmick and when is it something that's going to be taken into the fabric essentially of the game? And I think that's really what history is going to judge about the changes that are being made now, is which ones are the ones that are going to be accepted as part of the fabric of the game, and which ones are going to be, here we've got people who are still considering the DH a gimmick, even though it's been 50 years almost, right? So, it's like, again, it comes down to some kind of existential, deep, I don't know, feeling in our souls about this game that will make us argue about the DH still to this day, Yeah.
Yeah, well, that's the perfect segue to a question I wanted to ask Rick, which is around the DH. And I know that one of the rules being tested this year in the Atlantic League is the double hook rule, which basically means that once the starting pitcher is replaced, the DH position is also replaced by the incoming pitcher. So Rick, can you talk a little bit about how this rule has gone so far? And are people experiencing this like existential dread around it the way Cecilia describes?
No, but it's a fair question. I think the ones who are experiencing existential dread are managers trying to fill out a lineup card. In our league, our managers are generally assembling the rosters. They don't have the help of a player development department where they can get a great deal of resource there. And there was great debate before the season started of whether or not they were going to carry one more hitter and one less pitcher, or go with the same sort of roster componentry that it had in the past. Ultimately, most of the managers said, you know what, we play a lot of games, we're playing night after night, I'm going to carry an extra arm versus an extra bat. And the manifestation of that has been really interesting. In the first few games I saw this year, and in the first few games that you can take a look at, we were seeing managers doing double hook changes all the time. And they quickly realized they didn't have enough bats on their bench. And so within 10 days, they started finding ways to devise pitchers hitting and kind of disguising where they were in the lineup. And that was a sea change within literally 10 days. Now, with extra active rosters, you probably could get away with something a little different. But that said, the biggest single issue we've encountered, the single biggest issue we've encountered is how to score, because there's confusion occasionally with the umpires signaling to the press box what that change is. But that's easily worked out as we kind of go through a little bit more time. Incidentally, I've not heard, now we were a DH league, so perhaps this is not profound at all, but I haven't heard a word of complaint about the double hook rule from players, coaches, or most importantly, from the guests who come to our games.
Oh, it's interesting. Kind of surprising, actually.
Yeah, I've heard a little bit more about ABS than about a pitcher.
Yeah,
move,
okay, I guess maybe they're
heard too much about
distracted.
It's all comparative.
Yeah.
Yeah, what I'm curious about is if the double hook rule comes to the majors eventually, is it actually going to kind of put a tamp on bullpenning and, you know, the opener strategy? And are we going to go back to the more traditional starting pitcher? Because I think that's what they intend for it to do. I think my prediction, though, is that that's not actually going to be what happens. And what's going to happen is the Players Association is going to negotiate for larger rosters so that there can be more men on the bench, so that then it will just be, you know, if each pitcher has his own designated hitter, well, okay, fine. So, and that we're going to be sort of back in the soup, but not that I'm a pessimist or anything, but you know, I just think that so many times what we intend to do with a rule change isn't how it necessarily works out when it gets into the hands of managers who are trying to win a game. So, you know, you can intend for pitchers to speed up all you want. And I mean, the last time Major League Baseball tried to get pitchers to pitch faster, all they did was pay more fines and say, we don't, you know, essentially, you know, Jonathan Papelbon and some of his ilk were just like, I don't care. I've got money. I'm not speeding up. And they just had to kind of let it go, you know, like a little battle of wills took place. And so, yeah.
Well, it sounds like we're going to need to invest in maybe bigger score books, at least. I don't know. So there are a lot of other experiments going on in the minor leagues, such as the larger bases, infield positioning restrictions, pickoff restrictions, more aggressive pitch clocks, as you mentioned. So, JJ, are there any test rules that stand out to you, either in terms of the impact of the rule or the controversy that's getting generated?
It's interesting as we listen to kind of some of the answers here. Cecilia mentioned it, like, you know, when we talk about the extra inning rule, and that has generated a lot of controversy. And Rick's mentioned about the ABS, and I don't know how much controversy that's generated, but it definitely is a topic of discussion. When I've gone to Atlantic League games, it's been a topic of discussion. But the thing that stands out, I went in 2019 to an Atlantic League series to see, I don't know where my video went, but to see kind of the how these rules, a lot of these rules impacts the game and for fans and all that. And I think a lot of the most successful rules changes, the ones that have the most likelihood. Now, right now we've seen at the major league level that Major League Baseball is willing to make what a lot of people would consider significant radical rules changes. The extra inning rule, I think, is a prime example of that. But the most successful of these are the ones that you don't really notice as a fan very much. I would say this about the Atlantic League with the rules changes. They did the larger bases and all first. Well, I promise you, if you ask the average fan who was there and say, is the base larger? If you didn't ask them, they'd never know. Okay, well, you know, again, people in baseball love to complain about rules changes. Back when we had the collisions at the plate or the intentional walk, I'm going to now nod instead of throw 4 balls. And everyone treats every rules change in baseball, not everyone, but a lot of fans treat every rules change in baseball, whatever it is, as if it's the most significant thing that's ever happened. And a lot of these things, when it comes to the larger bases or when it comes to a pitch clock that goes from 20 seconds to 15, a lot of people decry the pitch clock. There's no clock in baseball. There shouldn't be a clock in baseball. I promise you, if you go to a AA or AAA game, and now they have some in A ball too, most fans will never notice it. It fades into the background. Now, one could argue that it's not really that strictly enforced in a lot of places. And that may be an issue because if you have a, Cecilia mentioned about how Papelbon and all taking fines. Well, at the minor league level, the umpires have a strong incentive not to enforce it because this is a rule that both sides disagree with. And so if an umpire very strictly calls the pitch clock, what will happen is they get yelled at from both dugouts all game. And so a lot of times what you have seen is the enforcement is extremely lax in some cases because when we talk about the security theater of the sticky substances, Major League Baseball, I don't think particularly wants to have your ace pitchers. They don't want Garrett Cole to be suspended for 10 games. What they want to is figure out a way to eradicate that from the game, but do so in a manner that hopefully doesn't get anyone caught or anyone tarred with this. And so again, there's a subtlety to it. But I think overall, a lot of these rules changes, the most successful ones, the ones like the larger base, which may slightly cut down on the number of collisions at first base, which could reduce injuries, that may make it slightly more likely that you can steal a base. Those kind of things, the pickoff rule, are, if they're subtle enough that few fans will notice, they're the most likely to have, I think, a successful kind of adoption because they're minor tweaks to the game, not major rules revisions.
Yeah, Cecilia, Rick, anything you wanted to add to that?
I will tell you one thing that gives me a sense of great joy. Not only with our fans, but also with some of our players, especially catchers. They sometimes take automated balls and strikes, and the communication system has been so seamless that I still see catchers trying to pull a ball into the strike zone or freeze a ball after a pitch is thrown. And it cracks me up. I'm like, do you not realize what you are doing right now? And then again, I always chuckle when I hear a fan tell an umpire he's blowing a call, overlooking the fact that he didn't make that call at all. That call was determined by a digital technology. And so JJ makes a good point. If it's seamless, it doesn't take away from the overt joy associated with the game.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I just think the game hasn't been the same since we took away the fake to third, fake to first, Just ruined for me since that got taken out, I'm kidding, obviously. And only Jeff Nelson was like the only guy who ever did it. So, he's retired, so we're fine.
So question for you, Rick. So obviously, baseball's learning a great deal from a lot of these rules experiments and how they're playing out in the Atlantic League and other leagues. But obviously these aren't, the Atlantic League and the major leagues aren't identical environments. So are there any considerations that you think should be accounted for before we extrapolate the results of some of these experiments in the Atlantic League and other minor league experiments to what we would actually observe happen in the majors if the same things were implemented there?
In order to answer that question, I have to give you just a bit of context about our league, Emily. It's a great question. Our league was originally founded as something called a second chance league. The founders of the league exerted great wisdom in identifying a niche with players who had been released for one reason or another. Perhaps they couldn't throw the ball as hard. Perhaps they couldn't go to their left. In many cases, they were on the back nine of their career. But there are a lot of places where players are released because of a numbers game, because of dispositional bias with the organizations they play for, because a bullpen is too crowded and, for financial reasons and so forth. And those players have a lot of gas left in their proverbial tank. Because of that, we traditionally have transferred significant numbers of our players back to big league organizations at all levels of the sport. Sometimes they're a fill-in, sometimes they're looked upon as having renewed vigor, and sometimes they're looked upon as truly viable. And it's like, oh my goodness, how did that club let go of this guy? He really fits our system. And over the years, we've not only transferred over 1,000 players back to big league organizations, but over 220 of them now have actually gotten back to the big leagues. It's really an exceptional thing to watch. This year, unlike any year before, for scores of reasons, the velocity and the amount of players we and other partner leagues are transferring back to big league organizations is remarkable. This afternoon, I signed our 56th contract, taking players out of the league and putting them back in affiliated baseball. Now, my counterparts in other partner leagues are doing something very similar. But in terms of your question, we have seen cumulative rosters of 200 players decimated by something approaching 30%. And of course, the players that replace those that we've lost don't have the skill set by definition of those we started the season with. So it gives us a little bit of inherent bias no matter when you beta test. So the difference between today and tomorrow is profound. And again, in our case, it's 56 players down, replaced by 56 players without the same skill level. So on anything we test, we're dealing with players who aren't as quick, aren't as fast, don't throw as hard, don't hit as far, and so forth. So I think that does have a big impact on our test rules. We discuss this virtually every other day or so with Major League Baseball. They're well aware of what's going on, but they don't feel as if that inherent bias I just described serves to mitigate the trials in a way that they want to debunk them. They're still keenly interested in the outcome of the experiments themselves.
Okay, that's really interesting. I guess that sort of segues into a question I wanted to ask JJ around the impacts from a player development perspective. So, there's a lot of different rules changes being tested at once, and with various rules being tried in different leagues and different levels for players who are maybe coming up through the minor league system, I could see how this could be somewhat disorienting. So do you think that there will be any ramifications of this multitude of experiments from a player development perspective?
Yeah, I do think there's some. And, Rick mentioned it. There's a little bit of A/B testing going on here. So it's also, you're going to play in some cases half the season with one thing, and then you may play the other half the season with something else. We've seen that in the Atlantic League. We're seeing this when we talk about the larger bases in AAA. They're playing half the season with the larger bases and half without. Now, again, that's such a subtle rule change that you may not notice any difference. But in the low A Southeast, what we used to know as the Florida State League, they're doing automated ball strikes this year. Well, they're not doing it every game. So you can play one game and it's a human strike zone, and the next night in the same ballpark, it's an automated ball strike zone. Well, that kind of potentially does mean as a hitter that in a pitcher, you're having to learn two slightly different strike zones. Or if you go from one level where with these pickoff rules, with some of the rules they have there, we're seeing base stealing numbers that we don't normally see. It kind of changes. Again, this is the intent of it, but it's going to encourage base stealing, but it also, from a developmental standpoint, it could encourage some, if you go from a league that has the pickoff rule adjustments to a league that doesn't, there's going to be an adjustment period, because all of a sudden what worked for you there isn't going to work for you necessarily at another level. One other example of that does stand out to me, as I mentioned, low A Southeast has automated ball strike. Well, minor league umpires are a development system as well. If you're a minor league umpire, college umpires umpire, and it's a side gig. Minor league umpires, you sign up, it's a vocation. You go through the training, the school, and then your goal is your hope is that you're going to start out in the complex leagues, go up to low A, high A, double A, triple A, and eventually you'll be a major league umpire. Well, and again, they are going back and forth. It's not like automated ball strikes is being called every day in that league. However, if you're an umpire in the low A Southeast League, you are getting less experience calling balls and strikes than an equivalent umpire in the low A West League, who next year you're both hoping to move up the ladder. From a developmental standpoint, again, it makes sense. And one could argue that the low A Southeast umpire may have a little extra advantage if automated ball strikes, robo-ump spreads everywhere. But it does also mean that under the current rules, they're a little bit further behind developmentally as far as their ability to call balls and strikes, because they're just getting a little less experience doing so.
Mm-hmm.
Cecilia, was something you wanted to add?
Yeah, I have something to add about that, which is that talk about unintended consequences, though. I think that it's possible, and we won't know really till we see the experience in the data, that the umpires who are experiencing, automated ball strike are actually going to be better at calling the strike zone in the future. And that there was that major study that was released out of a BU researcher whose name I'm now blanking on, who basically had the 2018 study that showed that, umpires missed 34,000 ball strike calls in the major leagues that season. One of the conclusions of that study also was that the umpires who came up, who had less experience at the major league level, and who had always had access to pitch effects, giving them post-game feedback about their strike zone, had more accurate ball strike calling than the more experienced umpires who had been calling their own strike zone, for decades. So, that teaching tool of looking at your results and pitch effects and then trying to think back to, okay, which calls were it that I missed, actually helped those guys to be better ball strike callers. And so maybe ABS, training with ABS is going to be something that will actually make them better umpires, even if they don't end up using ABS at the major league level. Although I think we're going to get some version of it at some point.
Yeah, so I guess sticking in that vein of, technology and, maybe some of the more advanced analytics, I know that one of the changes that was proposed by Theo Epstein was to take analytics off the field directly, as in let teams use the advanced analytics up until the game starts. And then after that, don't let them reference that data on their iPads in the dugout. So Cecilia, what are your thoughts on that proposal?
I kind of like it, in that idea that, yeah, you can do all the knowledge and, so forth, but then you kind of have to memorize it. But then on the other hand, memorization, I don't think was necessarily a big skill set of major league players. So, you already have guys who can't remember what the signs are when a guy's on second, and whatnot, and have to go through it all over again, especially now that we can't have meetings on the mound and, whatnot. So everybody's got like cheat sheets written in their hat and, all that kind of stuff. So, it's like they might almost be, probably Theo Epstein has the brain to, memorize a list of 2 billion things and, not blink, but I don't know that your average, uniformed personnel of Major League Baseball necessarily has that same, or is expected to have that same capacity. So, I don't know about that one, but like, I kind of like the idea though, that we would have a kind of pure system where it would be, yeah, you don't have your notepads and your binder and, all that kind of thing. You kind of have to just bring it all with you onto the field in your head.
Right.
I would go along with that. Yeah.
So taking a bit of a broader view of changes to minor league baseball. So obviously minor league baseball went through a substantial restructuring before the season, where it was previously 14 leagues spread across 5 levels, became 11 leagues spread across 4 levels, and I think upwards of 40 teams lost their affiliation. And Rick, I know you were talking about some of the ripple effects that you're seeing in your league from these changes, but I'm curious, I guess maybe from either Rick or JJ, what other sorts of ripple effects are you seeing from this really major sea change with the minor leagues?
Oh, you go ahead first.
Why don't I start, JJ, and
you
you can hitchhike? How's that?
Sounds good.
We're seeing some obvious changes in our league where 2 of our teams were tapped on the shoulders, invited to become affiliated clubs, and then we had to replace them. We are delighted with those replacement teams. I wouldn't even call them a replacement team, but the Lexington Legends and the West Virginia Power have fit beautifully into our league. They work well in our territory, and we're going to see more of that as time goes by. So a lot of the business and operating issues that most SABR members might not observe are dramatic and have a profound effect on the industry itself. On the players' side, you start to talk about a lack of depth in organizations. You start to then take a look at the 180 player cap on organizations imposed by MLB, you start to then look at the number of players who currently are injured or in 2020 didn't play and decided to retire. And you start to jam those together. And we are seeing a very interesting dynamic in terms of how players are reaching the big leagues. Now, I will share with you that there is a great deal of optimism and confidence, I should add, that the partner leagues feel prepared, ready, willing, and are taking steps to become an alternative pathway to Major League Baseball. And Cecilia would know, JJ would know, Emily, you probably would know far more numbers of players who were drafted after the 20th round and who went on to have stellar big league careers. But I think intuitively, we all realize that this year in the July draft, there will be 600 highly skilled amateur free agents who would have signed contracts 2 years ago and aren't signing contracts with major league organizations this year. That is both a challenge and an opportunity for the industry, but it moves much more along the opportunity curve for every partner league. But if we're the Pioneer League or if we're the Frontier League, we're pretty excited right now because we're going to give those young players an opportunity to develop in our league and start the journey to the big leagues just in a different way.
To kind of echo that, I do think that this year you hear a lot. There have been complaints about the quality of play in baseball. I really think for, ever since probably the second game. I think the first game they're like, this is really cool, this new version of rounders or whatever. And by game 2 is like, that first game quality of play was way better. So again, it's hard to equate that, but you do hear a lot this year about the fact that, and I think there's a legitimacy to, like Rick talked about it. I've talked to Atlantic League managers. I've talked to, other partner league managers who are saying, I normally am looking for this caliber of player. And right now, instead of looking for a player with AA experience to replace the player who we lost, I'm calling coaches and saying, do you have a graduating senior? Well, graduating seniors normally are not capable of handling the speed of the Atlantic League, but this year it's a different year. There are right now, we had a story up at Baseball America today. By our count, there are 910 players on injured list right now. Now, Rick talked about like when you have 50 plus players, the number's already gone up. I talked to Rick yesterday for this story and the number's gone up since then, which just tells you how fast players are being signed. But he talked about like when you lose 2 full rosters, what that means to the quality of play. But also when for every 7 players you have on an active roster, there's 1 player on the IL across the minor leagues. That also stands out just of how significant that is to the quality of play. And we're seeing that this year. And some of that may be the effects of the layoff from last year. Some of this may be growing pains as we adjust to a new system. But the other thing that we are going to see, and I think Rick's talking about this, we've been in a world where affiliated baseball was, if you didn't have affiliated baseball, it was like, okay, you're in a different class. It was kind of viewed by a lot of people. And this year has kind of shown some of those cities, I love the Appy League. I love the old version of the Appy League, but I also can't tell you if you're at an Appy League game and you say to those fans, why are you at an Appy League game? They had Vladimir Guerrero Jr. there a few years ago. They had Wander Franco. They've had some great players come through, when they were a professional league. But most fans at every minor league ballpark are there for the experience, for the enjoyment of it's a social night out. There's entertainment. It's generally inexpensive. There's a lot of aspects to it. And one of the things that happened, I'm an optimist. I try to find the good. I know that there are cities and there are fans who understandably are very upset because they lost their affiliated club or whatever. But I think also people are experiencing this year that, if you're in the Pioneer League, it can still be a very enjoyable night out at the ballpark. And the fact that it is a partner league and not an affiliated league doesn't really change that nearly as much as maybe a lot of fans thought that it did.
Yeah.
I really want to see one of those 5-pitch swing offs. Like I really do. I mean, talk about radical rules changes. You know, it's like you don't like the runner on second tiebreaker rule. It's a 5-pitch home run
Let's
derby.
home run derby.
You know, and I'm just, and part of me is like, oh, it's not real baseball, but at the same time, I really want to see it.
Right.
So, maybe it would be exciting. I don't know. Probably as a fan, if my team wins it, I'm like, this is the best idea ever. And if my team loses, I'm like, it was a gimmick.
Cecilia, I can give you a report from my counterpart at the Pioneer League. We started talking about that yesterday, and I think this has happened now on maybe 4 occasions, but the reports he's getting are the fans are deeply engaged, stomping their feet, cheering rabidly for people to hit a home run. And again, it's fun. And the reason people go to minor league baseball games, generally speaking, is to have fun. It's an entertainment vehicle. And that certainly is manifesting itself with the swing off rule. And I love the name of it. I love the fact that you've reported it. And I love the fact that it seems to be successful for them.
That's great.
Yeah. Give me the swing off. I'm the batter versus pitcher person. Right? Yeah. There you go. It's something gladiatorial,
So switching gears to maybe things that are, a little bit more likely to end up in the major leagues, even though that would be very interesting. I don't know. Actually, I wanted to talk about the things that have already made it to the majors and things that have stuck around from last year. So the starting runner on second and extras, and then the 7-inning doubleheaders. So I guess for you, Cecilia, how do you feel these changes have actually impacted the game and the fan experience?
Yeah, the 7-inning doubleheader still makes sense to me just because it's been a perennial difficulty with, do you have enough pitchers? Do you have enough people? And especially just the way people are injured so often and, whatnot. It's like you didn't come to the ballpark to see, a call up who's, I don't know, they had to fill up the roster with. You went to see the star, star players for the most part, right? So, it's like I feel 7-inning doubleheaders are legitimate, especially given how long major league games are. I don't feel like I'm not getting my money's worth out of 7-inning doubleheaders. The runner on second rule, I still feel like is a gimmick. It's like, I understood the need for it, but at the same time, every time it happens, I'm like, again, like, I don't know. I'm just, yeah. I feel like if our team's really prepared for this, it's like, is the roster construction, affected by the fact that now they're like, oh, we've got to figure out how we're going to, I don't know. And we haven't really seen, I don't know. We thought, well, we'll see more bunting and, this and that. And it's like, and I don't think we are very much actually. Teams are still just like, you know what, we should try to hit a 2-run home run instead of 1. And, it's just, yeah, I don't know. So jury's out on that.
Jury's out. Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. So I want to take some time to take some of the audience submitted questions. So there are a couple here around, I think, pitch clocks. So so someone went to a Rancho Cucamonga Quakes game and noted that some pitchers actually follow the rule, others are a few seconds over the rule. And this person wanted to know how have these rules been enforced? And then someone else wanted to know, what about the idea of actually making the penalty be a ball? So whoever wants to jump in there.
The penalty is a ball. The penalty is supposed to be is that if you do not deliver a pitch in time. I have on very rare occasions, I have been at a game and seen a ball enforced, an automatic ball. Now, it is like seeing a comet streaking across the sky. It is not something that is something that you are going to. I have never seen an umpire who is sitting there focused on whether a pitch. It is in the most. I've seen 2 examples. I'm talking more though than me being there, talking to people who've, are in AAA or AA and been for this rule for years. 2 examples. One is if someone is so egregious that it's almost showing up the umpire, you would describe it. If the clock hits 0 and the pitcher is still sitting there tugging on his hat and looking like he has no intention of ever throwing a ball, that's when it often is enforced. And the other is just the simple reality is everyone who's in a workplace probably understands this. if the umpire supervisor, if there's a boss there that night, you have seen cases where all of a sudden the rule is enforced in a much more strict manner than it is on a normal night. And again, maybe there's a league that I've missed in affiliated baseball where it's enforced more. And I do notice that the low A West League right now, as far as time of game, is running much more briskly than all the other leagues, almost everyone. There's a one AA league that's running under 3 hours regularly also for 9-inning games. But I do think what we've also seen when this rule was implemented, it's a longer pitch clock, but was implemented in AAA, we saw the first year, they also, cut the time between innings and all that, but you saw a big drop in time of pace of play, time of game. Atlantic League has been one of the leaders on pace of play, but I think I would love to hear Rick's thoughts on this. But one of the things that stands out to me is it is something that you have to constantly make efforts for, because the natural inertia is, if left unchecked, if you cut the game from 3 hours to 2:45, next year it's 2:47, the year after it's 2:49, and you turn back around and it's 3 hours again, but at the blink of a finger, unless you're continually making efforts. Is that a fair way to put it, Rick?
Oh, you're absolutely correct, JJ. I can't add anything to that. You nailed it. You're spot on with that. I will share one thing with you, though, that might not be well known to the audience watching this. When we put together our now kind of within the industry infamous pace of play committee back in, 2014, 2015, thereabouts, the actual rule book time between pitches, as described by Major League Baseball's rule, was 12 seconds. And we said, you know what, let's just enforce the rule. And I don't know when or if that rule has been eliminated. I do know that it's been superseded by the 15 seconds they're asking for now. But I like the original rule, but I like games that move along at a crisp rate too.
I will note, I read in the rule book this past year, the 12 seconds is still there in the Major League Baseball rule book. It just is never enforced.
Right.
Yeah. There's a dinosaur among us, and it's in the rule book.
Right. Which makes you wonder, when did that rule get in there, and why? Sort of, like 12 is really specific, and it's not 12 seconds between pitches, but from the time the pitcher gets the ball, he's only got 12 seconds to hold it, essentially, right? And it's like, at some point, somebody must have been dragging, and you can look back through the historical record, and there are complaints about how slow baseball is, going basically all the way back to 1890. Where there's always people who wanted it to be faster, and then always people who are like, well, but the players want to play sort of at their pace. They control the game, but I was describing it to somebody, like, imagine if in soccer, the goalie was allowed to just hold the ball, for half the game. He's not, he's got to put it back out there, right? Or his team doesn't score either, but people would riot if if all the goalie did was stand there for 20 seconds with the ball, right? So it's just, but soccer's a game of constant action, and baseball's a game of stop and start action. So it's like there's too many opportunities, where things stop. And there are a lot of examples of how even when there are time clocks, who is it? One of the college coaches was saying that players seem to have figured out all the ways, though, that they can get that extra time in between when the clock is running. Then, it's like every player tries to figure out how to get those extra 5 seconds. And, whether it's, you pretend you got dirt in your eye, or you got to tie your shoe, or, whatever it is, there's every players, pitchers and batters both have figured out ways to try to get those extra couple of seconds to put their head together, and it's like, all right. So how do you stop that? I don't know.
I was just going to note, like, you always hear there's never a clock in the game. That's what's great about baseball. And I do like the Bill James quote from years ago where he noted, no, the game had a clock, because until you had artificial lights, the clock was the sun's going to go down and we got to get the game over before then.
Yep.
So there's another question here about shifts, and I know that like some of the experiments going on are around infield positioning restrictions. So this person was asking, what about teaching players, young and old, to hit to more fields, obviating the use of overshifts that we've been seeing? This has obviously been going on for a number of years, so and they haven't learned yet. So, what do you think of these new rules around those positioning restrictions?
My thing is the same way when they say, well, why doesn't everyone bunt against the shift? And the reality of it is that, again, you assuming that baseball players and baseball coaches are rational actors. And again, there's always some friction and all that, but assuming they're rational actors, the answer is that by doing so, you run the risk. If you are an all fields hitter, it's one thing, but if you are someone who is not comfortable hitting the ball to the opposite field, if that is not your swing, if that is not what you are comfortable doing, the mere act of trying to do so, trying to turn yourself into that, may actually be more detrimental for you than to try to hit through the shift, which is why they don't try to do it, which is why we have these rules. Because if it was, if we've seen left-handed hitters, batting averages plummet, especially because it's easier shift against lefties. Well, it's not like that these major leaguers don't want to succeed. So it's not something where if it was as simple as, okay, well, now I'm going to, also people pitch with the shift too. I'm not going to go as away as far to you. If I'm shifting you, I'm going to come in. It's really, if I throw fastballs in, it's really hard for the average hitter to hit that to the opposite field.
Yeah.
Yeah. And people don't realize that how difficult it is to bunt. I think a lot of people want to say, oh, I've just put down a bunt, as if that's an easy thing to do, especially when now everyone throws 100 miles an hour.
Right.
The bunt is not like a guarantee of some kind that people are just leaving on the table.
Right. So we have just a few minutes left, and I kind of wanted to take a little bit of a different angle and talk about baseball's unwritten rules. And I think most of the rules changes that we've been discussing are more around making the game itself more action-packed, and there's also a lot of discourse around making the players themselves more interesting and more relatable. So baseball has this friction between this, let the kids play mentality and really encouraging the young stars like Fernando Tatis Jr. to flip the bat and, really wear their heart on their sleeve. And then you have kind of this old guard, the Tony La Russas of the game, who really hold a different view and think that playing baseball really requires a certain sense of decorum. So what do you think holds the greater potential to draw new fans in the game? Is it making the game itself more exciting, or is it embracing a new culture around the game? So maybe I'll start with you, Cecilia.
I'd say embracing the new culture around the game is valid and real, and that and the advent of social media and and how many people are double screen fans who are not only watching the game on one screen, they've got their Twitter feed open, or they're in a Discord chat, or they're on the Baseball Perspectives live stream, chatting about the game in real time. And yeah, those are the folks who are, who are following the players on social media and who want to see pictures of the player's dog and, all of that kind of thing. And now that there is that sort of direct line between the players and the public, and, it's not all just filtered through a couple of columnists at newspapers, and whatever, who pick which human interest story to relate to you. I think it makes sense for Major League Baseball to lean into that. And, yeah, there's still a little going to be some old school, new school, culture clashes, but, that's to be expected. This generation, when they are older, are going to have culture clashes with the next generation too. So, it's just, that's part of it. I think, yeah, the let the kids play mentality, I think, really is what's interesting people the most, in that the fannies in the seats kind of sense. People want to go to see their actual player in the flesh. Then that's what makes it exciting to go to see it live, is that you're rooting for that hero, and that's something that baseball's always had and always will have. So, lean in on that.
What about you, Rick?
Emily, I have to say this. I'm recollecting one of the all-time great promotions in minor league baseball. And some years ago, Mike Veck and the St. Paul Saints published a book called The Unwritten Rules of Baseball. And they gave that to every fan who came to a game that evening. And they got the book, and sure enough, there it said on the cover, The Unwritten Rules of Baseball. And then you open it up, and the pages were blank. And it was just so novel and such a wonderful promotion. I wish I had one of those. I think it's very funny.
That's cool. I wonder if our CEO Scott Bush has a copy.
Kind of just tying to that, like what I do think controversy. You look at it. I mean, you look at sports. Why do dynasties draw fans? Because you want to see the top team knocked off. I look right now. I just look at it's not just my family, but I see my family experience. I've been a Formula One fan for a long time. I was the lone Formula One fan in the family. Like that would not be surprising. It's a auto racing that largely takes place in Europe and Asia. Well, then Netflix comes out with Drives to Survive, and it is the greatest guerrilla marketing. It's not even guerrilla marketing, but the greatest marketing I've seen by a sports league in any. And I say it's not my family has become Formula One fans, and they are now diehard Formula One fans after watching this somewhat a little bit over dramatized documentary done really well. And now they're on they've done 3 seasons of it. But I'll tweet something about Formula One and I'll get responses from all over the country from baseball fans who also are watching the Formula One race. And invariably, when I ask them, I was like, how long have you been a Formula One fan? And the answer is, oh, I watched Drive to Survive. That's one, it's not easy to do, but if you say, how are you going to build the next generation of baseball fans? One of the ways to do it is that you have young players in this game who are fascinating. The Fernando Tatis Jr.'s of the world, the Ronald Acuñas, the Vladimir Guerrero Jr.'s. Ideally, and again, it's going to be an overly dramatized, it's going to be an overly romanticized version of them. That's what documentaries are. But things like that, if you can show the personality of those players, and the fact that Fernando Tatis Jr. will bat flip it to the moon after a home run adds to people being interested in. There's not really, to be honest, that interesting about a guy who hits a homer and puts his head down and jogs around the bases. Yes, there are fans who are already fans of the game who will be interested in that, but it's not something that attracts people and go, I need to know more about that player, generally out there among the casual or the not yet baseball fan.
Yeah, agreed.
Right.
All right, so I think that concludes our session. So I just want to say thank you all so much for joining today and sharing all your insights. I think it was really interesting discussion, and it's going to be very, very fun to see how all these rules changes play out, and which ones actually make it into the major leagues. So we'll be keeping an eye on that. But thanks everybody. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you, Emily.
So
thank you. Be well, everybody.
Bye,
so
guys.
that concludes our session for today, and we look forward to seeing everyone back tomorrow, where our programming will include a panel discussion on the Negro Leagues as major leagues, SABR's annual business meeting, and a member social hour. So that all kicks off tomorrow at 3 Eastern, 12 Pacific, and we hope to see you all there. So thanks again for joining, and have a fantastic evening.